Hello, this is Miss Dagenford, and so I wanted to finish our lessons on cell respiration. And remember our goal, we have this glucose molecule that has lovely, lovely electrons that we want to get at. These electrons have high energy. And remember, you don't need to know why that is, other than it has to do with the placement of electrons. These electrons are just a little bit boosted in energy. We want those electrons. And so the whole point of glycolysis was to kind of break open the glucose and start the process, get ourselves a couple of NADH and ATP. The entire goal of the Krebs cycle was to really get at those electrons, and we are building up our convoy of electron mobile carriers, electron transport molecules. And so here's our little picture where we are now. So where we are now, my computer is slow here. Where we are now, here's our glycolysis in our cytoplasm, making 2 ATP. And then the pyruvate, there's 2 of them, remember. Our pyruvate is going to go into the mitochondria. And so here's this inner part of the mitochondria. Here's our Krebs cycle. And we're going to do that twice. We're going to make our Krebs cycle circle once for each pyruvate. And so here's where we stand. We've got 4 NADH up here for this pyruvate, and I went ahead and put the little pictures up that'll help you see them. And then we've got 4 NADH for this pyruvate. Between the prep stage and the Krebs cycle, we've got ourselves 4 NADH each. That's 8. And then we have 1 FADH2 up here, 1 FADH2 down there. And then we do have ATP, but only 2 of them. So we've got our nice little army convoy of electron carriers, NADH and FADH2. But what can we do with them? Because they are not ATP. We want ATP. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our electron transport chain, and this is going to be the big payoff. Now, just for a little bit of humor, you have this slide. You'll see it in class. It's just one of my favorite ones to see. So again, just for the Krebs cycle, you don't have to know the big details. You need to know the products, why we go through the Krebs cycle. So by the end of the Krebs cycle, here we have this big boatload, our big payout, our convoy of these electron carriers. What can we do with them? Well, along comes our electron transport system. Now, this is a bit like one of those complicated dances that I know sometimes you guys like to do on your TikTok. And so what I want to encourage you to think about is if you can master those complicated dances on TikTok, then you can do this. You want to almost envision this as the dance moves, right? And I know these dance moves. I would never, ever, ever do the TikTok ones, but I want to encourage you, if you can figure out those complicated dance moves, you can figure this out. So the goal of the electron transport system is to use the energy in those electrons to pump hydrogens across. Now, this should be somewhat familiar because we've talked about this in photosynthesis. We're going to pump hydrogen ions across, build up a high concentration of hydrogen ions, they're protons, basically. And then we're going to use that high concentration of hydrogen ions and let them diffuse through ATP synthase to make ATP. Hey, we saw that before. So not too outrageous of a phenomenon. So let's go through our dance moves, if you will. So the first thing we know is that we're going to take our NADH and FADH2, our dump truck and bulldozer, and we're going to drop off these high energy electrons. And we're going to drop it off into the electron transport chain. Now think about these as your dancers. And so every time we drop off high energy electrons, this causes the electron transport chain to get a little bit excited and they're going to be moving the electrons down. So the electrons are shuffling through the electron transport chain, and each time those molecules get the electron, they get a little bit of excitement from that. And so we're dealing with energy here, and each time they pass the electron on, they're getting excited. Now, that energy that they have can be used to pump hydrogen ions across. And that's the key. Once we pump hydrogen ions across, we're making a high concentration of hydrogens. And now we're back to familiar territory. Hydrogen ions power the ATP synthase. The only thing we need to talk about is what happens to the electrons when they're done. And here's where we get into oxygen. We've not really talked about oxygen yet in terms of oxygen gas. We've talked about carbon dioxide that has oxygen, but where does oxygen come into play? If you know your CPR, you know that we can't live much past a few minutes without oxygen. We start having brain damage. So oxygen is clearly important, but why? What's it doing? Well, oxygen is the last dumping ground for those electrons that now have very low energy. And so without that energy, without that electron, without the oxygen to kind of catch those electrons, we're kind of stuck. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So here's kind of one diagram that is super helpful. So let's go through our step-by-step. So notice NADH drops off electrons. And notice the yellow arrow would be the electron pathway. And so here's NADH dropping off its electrons, and follow my red dot. The electron's going to be passed from molecule to molecule until it gets to the end, and that's where oxygen comes and picks it up. And this keeps happening. Every NADH comes along, drops off the electron, boom, 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 and then we have oxygen picking it up. And then another NADH passing it from molecule to molecule, and then oxygen takes it at the end. Now, notice every time these molecules have the electron, three of them have enough energy to pump hydrogens. So the electrons power the hydrogen ions being pumped over, and you get this high concentration of hydrogens. Now, FADH2 is also dropping off its electrons, but at a slightly later stage. So here we have an electron being passed to this molecule, and then it powers hydrogen moving over. And then the electron keeps going, and then here a hydrogen can be pumped. The electron gets passed, and then one last hydrogen can be pumped over. So we make a nice big hydrogen concentration, and they're going to be able to diffuse once more, and then here's our little enzyme that's making ATP. So that is one little section. And why don't you pause there and make sure that you kind of understand, stare at this diagram a little bit, and you'll be asked some questions in class. So here's another diagram. And again, see if you can pick up the things that we talked about. So notice NADH drops off our electrons. Here's our electron pathway. And then here's our oxygen at the end. So our little assembly line of electron transport, there's an electron, they're passing them down. Now the thing I like about this diagram is it kind of shows you this keeps happening. Electrons keep getting shuttled down until oxygen state keeps it at the end. Keep thinking, what happens if this oxygen is not there? Again, here's our the electrons that are fueling and powering the hydrogens getting pumped over. And then the last step over here, we have a high concentration of hydrogens. They can diffuse through our ATP synthase, and then ATP gets made. So that is our kind of a complicated TikTok dance, if you will, of our electron transport. The electrons have energy, they're being dropped off, they're getting shuffled, and their power means that we can make a proton gradient, a hydrogen ion gradient. And that ion gradient, that hydrogen gradient, is so important that if that's not there, ATP is not getting made. So where is the source of electrons? NADH and FADH2 are bringing and dumping the electrons. Where's the electron going? The electron is going down through our electron transport molecules, eventually to oxygen. What are they doing while they're being transported? They can provide the energy to pump hydrogens through. Why is that so significant? That's going to power the ATP synthase. Athletes, you know this intuitively. The more oxygen you deliver, the more stamina you have. And now you can make the connection. The more oxygen we have, the more of these can happen, the more ATP we make, the more muscle power we have. Now, the last little bit we have is just the accounting. And remember, we have 8 NADH from this conversion. Each one of these can make 3 ATP. FADH2 only makes 2. So I want you guys to be thinking about our numbers here. Do the math. The glycolysis has NADH as well. 2 NADH can make, each one can make 2 ATP. So do the math. 2 NADH times 2. When we have NADH from that conversion step, 2 NADH, each one can make 3. And then each one of these can make 3. And then the FADH2 can only make 2. So try your hand at the accounting, and let's see if you have the right amount. And then we have some questions to answer.